as we have a chance to talk about both research and then learn from the front lines of coaching from one of our great leaders. And tonight we are really lucky to have Kelcy McKenna with us, who's the head coach of the women's tennis team, and is not only a great coach, but was also a tremendous tennis player, was one of the top players in the country. If you know about her background, if you've read about it all, she played at Arizona State and was just really, I think as high as I was reading your bio again, Kelcy, up as high as number 3 in the country. So it was just literally one of the very best in the country and had a tremendous career. And she's also very just great leader around. This morning, I was out doing some morning exercise. I have this weird exercise I do where I carry around, some of you, I have this heavy backpack I carry around called rucking. Have you ever done that? Anyone? And I was doing it this morning and I was just finishing and I was in a full body sweat, and very winded. And I was walking through this parking lot to the car, and Kelcy happened to be walking through the parking lot, and she had this very concerned look on her face. And she said, are you okay? Did you think I was just having a bad day, or?
No, I just didn't know if you were in distress because I didn't know if you were at the start of your workout or the end of your workout. So obviously, depending on kind of where I interjected, it makes a huge difference, right?
I was in distress. I was. I'm just old and out of shape. But she's very kind as well. So she was checking on me this morning. And so the routine we have with these meetings is that we talk about a little bit of research, and then we learn from the coach. And this week has been a first, because when I spoke with Kelcy about it, she actually had a bunch of research ready to go. She had the research, so he made my job easy. But also it's a cue into how just thoughtful and smart she is as a leader. So one topic that we discussed that we would love to address tonight a bit relates to women in coaching, and just what does the research say about women in coaching. In particular, tonight we'll talk about in college coaching. And if you look at the chat, I've uploaded a link there. That's the report that Kelcy sent to me, and I enjoyed reading through as well. So if you could all kind of look through it a bit, but and Kelcy, you could probably tell us how did you initially engage this research? Where did you come upon it? It's now in year 11, the research project, but how did you first come upon it?
I was actually working on my master's thesis, and it was just a topic of interest for me. I had some really great female role models and mentors, and as I dove a little bit deeper, I realized that maybe wasn't necessarily common across all conferences, across all sports. I think it was really interesting to kind of peel back the layers and see where female coaches were thriving and which sports they were thriving in, and also how the hiring process worked. I had, maybe I would say, kind of a unique experience getting into coaching. I probably applied for 150 jobs and I did not get called back. So it kind of, the research, obviously I was fortunate enough that my initial boss gave me an opportunity, and then I continued to receive opportunities after that. But I think that question just kind of stuck with me, like, why was it so difficult to get into the industry, and also kind of maybe what was I missing from my resume that maybe a not appealing candidate. So I think that kind of was the initial thought, and then as I started coaching and pursuing my master's simultaneously, that kind of just, that seed was planted and just has stayed there since, I guess, 10 or 11 years ago.
I'm interested in asking you more about it, and I'm sure others are as well, about what you studied and also what you've pulled from this report. And I encourage everyone who's on just to take a look at it as well. But I was looking through a lot of the research yesterday on a number of studies on women in coaching, and it's very interesting. A lot of it is it was not surprising to read a lot of it. I read one study that talked about athletes' perceptions of coaches differences across men and women, and often the men were in this one study we read the men's expertise was attributed to kind of like their knowledge of games, and women's was attributed to like their ability to empathize and develop relationships. So it was very much kind of stereotypical along a lot of gender lines, like things we often see in other areas as well, stereotypes that are carried over into coaching. The other some of the other studies were similar to this one, looking at trend data. And I thought at the very beginning of this, Kelcy, it was interesting to see that actually in the last 10 years, the percent of women coaching women's sports has actually significantly increased. That's a promising finding from this report at the beginning of it. And then as it goes through, it shows kind of the percentage of women head coaches in Division I in different sports, which is pretty interesting. And then it actually gives different institutions ratings, like grades, based on their proportion or percent of women as coaches. I saw Wisconsin is there as a C, kind of right in the middle of the pack. Before I ask you some more questions, Kelcy, when you read this report in particular, what struck you as most interesting and relevant?
I also think just taking a closer look at maybe even the DE&I lens, obviously, I think is the proportion of minority coaches, and I think maybe underrepresented populations is also, I guess, just something to kind of note. And obviously, I think it's super important to have representation. I think that's one of the reasons I'm really passionate about it. So I think that those numbers, when you actually even look even closer, are I would say even the outliers are greater. So I think that's always really fascinating. And I think it's pretty cool to have the research over time and to see the increases and decreases and fluctuation in sport. And then I also just wonder how certain aspects of the role impact sports differently. So one of the things that Pete and I talked about was just the recruiting, how in certain sports there's a really great recruiting calendar that is centered more just around like having a work-life balance, and other sports maybe don't have a recruiting calendar, so it's a little bit tougher to manage that. So those are just some insights that I kind of think of when I look at the data.
Kelcy, moving to the intersection of both the research and your personal experience, you said you had a formative female coach or multiple formative female coaches. What did you draw from them as you were an athlete?
I think the biggest piece is just modeling, seeing that it can be done. I think that it's really important, I think, to have inspiration or role models, I think, early on. And I think when I played, it was the Pac-10. Obviously now it's the Pac-12, and then obviously that's changing again. But we had actually a ton of female coaches. I would say over 60% of the coaches in our conference were women. So I think you were exposed to that a lot. So I think the idea maybe doesn't seem as maybe outlandish as it might if you maybe had male role models. And I think it's also really important that male role models do a great job of helping cultivate interest if student athletes have interest in coaching. So I think, you can have champions in both genders across a lot of spectrums. So I think those two things were really important for me.
I was interested to see, and looking at on page 9 of the report, the breakdown by sport again, and tennis was kind of right in the middle of the pack. 43.5% of the head coaches were in tennis. Do you have a sense for why we see these differences across sport? Do you have hunches about that?
I think a big piece is for tennis, the recruiting calendar is definitely one of the bigger rigors of the position. So unlike most sports, we really only have a dead period of 2 days. So technically we could almost recruit any day that you're not competing the entire calendar year. So 360, what is that, 2 days? I think there's 3 days of dead period. So I think that that's one of the primary factors. And then tennis is a little bit different just because it's become like on the pro tour, it's very year round. And I think it's kind of transitioned that way in college too, just in terms of like summer training blocks. So I think it's, unless you're extremely intentional or you have like a really good system, it's difficult to kind of carve out those times where you can take a break, where you can kind of rest and be creative. So I would say that that's maybe one of the factors. players. And then I would also say a lot of times in tennis, someone could maybe coach both genders. So a lot of times you'll have one person coaching both men and women just at smaller schools because our roster numbers tend to be on the smaller side. We carry usually between like 8 and 12 student athletes. So I think that could be a factor too.
You definitely see that in track and cross country as well, which is where those numbers were really low for women. The one coach for both programs. Kelcy, what was your process like? You said it was very challenging to get a position. What do you remember about that process, and what would you advise other women going through the process of going from player to then trying to get a coach, become a coach, get a coaching job?
I think the process just, sometimes you don't really understand all the facets of being a coach, like what it entails in terms of the components of the actual position. I think you see your coaches kind of in the lens that you want to view them as a student athlete. So I think asking a lot of questions initially, I think being able to have mentors. I think our governing body, the ITA, does a really good job. They actually have a fast track program for people that are interested in becoming coaches. So they do a summer internship where you're exposed to a lot of different facets of tennis, whether that's pro tennis, junior tennis, college tennis. So I think trying to find those opportunities is really important because then you can see kind of which level you think you're going to be the best fit at. And I also think asking questions and making connections early to develop relationships and really honing what your coaching philosophy is going to be, and just trying to be exposed to a lot of different types of programs, whether you send out emails to ask if you could, interview coaches or even just go and visit their practice. I think those opportunities to just kind of learn and grow are really, really important. And I wish I would have done that retrospectively. I also think just trying to find mentors early in coaching is really important if that's something you have interest in, because you're going to be able to have those connections to potentially, just later on be able to learn and grow too when you are in a role. And I think that that's really important too, to continue to have a sounding board or someone to talk to in the role.
I wanted to ask you in a minute about the kind of holistic experience of women in coaching. And we briefly discussed this yesterday, kind of as you're living your life, not just as a coach, but all the other aspects of your life and how that affects women differently from men. Would like to ask you about that in a moment. But first, a kind of a tennis specific question that's actually a growing issue in other sports, which is in your sport, most of your players, if not all of them, come with also a personal coach. And we see this a lot in golf as well, where players come to a team with their own swing coach or with, their own private coach, which is different from, football or basketball or volleyball. How do you navigate that with young athletes having a voice in their ear that they've had maybe some of them for multiple years, and they still have that person in their life, but now you're their head coach at the college level?
For us, I think it's about forming a relationship and really viewing whatever influences in the student athlete's life as part of our coaching team. So I think staying in communication, making sure that everyone's on the same page. We operate on a development plan basis. So each student athlete has a development plan, and making sure that everyone is in alignment with what we're trying to work on, where we're trying to grow strengths, maybe where we're trying to improve weaknesses. And I think we really view the development plan as holistic. So we have 5 areas that we talk about and focus on. So for the tennis specific pieces, technically, tactically, those 2 areas, and hopefully we've mastered those each year in specific areas, and we kind of evolve and continue to move on to new pieces. I think we also talk about the leadership piece of that, and then obviously the academic piece, and then just socially, like what are they trying to accomplish, what things in their life do they want to add. So I think we really view that balanced approach as really integral and important. And in tennis, a lot of times you'll see parents as coaches too. So I think just making sure that they know that it's a street that runs 2 ways. So that's super important. And I also think that obviously when you can show demonstrated improvement over time with metrics, that's a really important piece, because you're going to have that initial trust and buy-in from the people who are kind of giving their players to you to coach. So I think that those kind of aspects really create a pretty seamless process. I think sometimes we do have speed bumps in the road, whether it's a training issue or an injury, and then we really view it as collaborative. But I think the biggest thing is demonstrating improvement metrically really helps just create trust. And I think it also just really shows that we are capable of having players here that are going to get better. So that really, I think, sometimes eliminates that fear from other coaches.
That developmental plan, that sounds like a really great idea. Is that something that you developed, or is that something that's common in tennis?
I'm not sure. I think for me, it's really important that everyone's on the same page with where we're going. So I think when we're referring to things that we're working on, whether it's in individuals or whether it's in team practice, like I love to have plans. I think it helps keep us organized. I think it helps keep our thoughts organized. And I think we know what areas we've mastered and what areas we need to continue to work on. And I think it just really creates no confusion. And I think that even when maybe we're injured or things are going wrong, like we still know we have other areas of the development plan that we're working on. So it's not kind of a win at all costs tennis only aspect. And I think that really helps foster a holistic approach to our growth here.
And so when it comes to the holistic approach for the student athletes, now let's talk about the holistic kind of experience for the coach. How do you think about that as being different for women than as for men, as you make just kind of high level comparisons of being a balanced person, a coach and a functioning person in society?
That's such a tricky question, Pete. I think the main thing that always comes to mind is how do we have student athletes? We have student athletes by people choosing to have children, whether that's through adoption or familial ties, or somebody choosing to have a pregnancy. So I think like that's how we have student athletes. So I think a lot of times the research shows that the predominant child rearing responsibilities fall more on females. So I think obviously that just right off the top is a challenge. Obviously having a pregnancy is a challenge. Continuing to work or be able to train on court is a challenge if you're pregnant. So I think all those aspects are just things to consider. I would say that probably from an emotional perspective, I would say like pretty similar. And I would say from like a work capacity perspective, pretty similar. But I think that is like a really difficult time. And I also think how do you integrate families into coaching on the on the male or female side of things? It's that balance, or trying to find that balance, is always elusive. You have times where work is going to maybe take the forefront, sometimes where your family is going to take the forefront. So I think trying to just prioritize those times and making sure you're communicating that across kind of all aspects of the pieces of your puzzle that are really important to you is one way that we have found success, because it can't be, I don't know. I've never been in a place where it could be 50-50 all the time.
Yeah. Have you experienced, or do you know of certain leadership attributes or policies or systems that are very supportive of this? In other words, like, are there certain programs that are known to support coaches, men and women, in what you talked about, doing it well, certain types of policies or ways of structural support?
I think there are a few instances that I'm aware of. So I do know that BYU, after like any sort of new family addition, they provide like travel for like a caregiver or a spouse for like up to a year post pregnancy, which I think is a really unique approach. I think if you look at the schools that have maybe higher grades on the report card, a lot of times they have built-in additional support, whether that's the Stork program, which provides like you can send milk like if you're pumping, or a nursing mom from like one location to the other. Obviously, if you're traveling, I think obviously the nursing pods are like a huge advantage, because some facilities, like, we don't have locker rooms. So I think that those just like small things make a huge difference in that. And then I think obviously just recognizing how to kind of create I guess opportunities around more assistance and help always makes things easier for everyone. But I do know BYU does have a really great program, but they're also a private institution, so different rules apply. So it's but it's very tricky, right? Because there's also the financial component, there's also the labor component. So it's never quite as easy as just adding, implementing a new program or a new policy.
Yeah. It sure was interesting to see the variance on that chart on page 10 that showed like the grades for each institution, to see, I mean, really great discrepancies in institutions just in terms of representation. And I'm sure there's even greater or similar discrepancies in terms of what types of supports like you're talking about. I want to, of course, invite others to ask questions about this topic, and also invite you to share more, Kelcy. But I also want to ask you before we totally move on from the topic about recruiting. And you're on the road recruiting right now, is that correct?
No, we're
Oh,
traveling.
you're having Max.
Yes. So usually if we have
You're
an off day from practice, we'll try and go and recruit to do like a home visit or to meet those coaches
That
that
was
we're
yesterday. I know
yeah,
yesterday I talked to
Monday.
you, or Monday I
Yeah,
talked to you. Yeah.
today we're traveling. We have one student athlete that's in qualifying, and then the other ones are coming to meet us and they're in main draw. So
Okay.
it's kind of planes, trains, and automobiles right now.
And I asked you a little bit the other day when we talked, but what does it look like? So when you go on, what'd you do this week on Monday? What is it like,
Uh,
literally that part of it play out?
Sure. So on Sunday night, I flew out and then my flight was delayed. So I ended up having to jump on a different flight. I landed at 1 a.m. and then her practice started at 8 a.m. So you got to get up, you got to figure out where you're going. We have like our recruiting pitch ready to go. So we'll usually watch her practice and then meet the coaching staff. We usually ask questions. So that's kind of what we call a home visit. And then usually we'll do a meal with the student athlete and their family. And then we go back to watch practice. And then I flew out and I got back in at like 12 a.m. And then we had practice the next day starting at 7. So yeah, it's kind of just, you just go when you can.
Yeah, gosh. Um, and just using that student athlete as a case example, what grade, for example, would that student athlete have been currently in high school?
So right now, we really don't think about grades necessarily, but usually it's like grad years.
Oh yeah,
So for
graduate.
us right now, we can do home visits with class of 24 and class of 25.
Okay.
So those
And
are
what
kind of the only 2 years, so like juniors basically.
and leading up to the home visit you did this week, what types of communication did you have with this prospect?
Usually we've watched them play a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times, because this summer we don't have it's unlimited, so you can watch them as much as you want. And usually the tournaments are multi-day events unless someone ends up losing pretty in the preliminary rounds. So usually we've talked to them, they have expressed interest, we've expressed interest, and then kind of we move forward in terms of building the relationship. So we I love to meet people in person. I think it's super important. I think it helps establish a connection with their coaches and with the student athletes to kind of see them in their environment. And then obviously we will invite the student athlete or the potential student athlete to come to campus and to see our environment, because we really think it has to be a good fit on both sides in order for it to be a success for the person's experience. And we want them to want to be a Badger all over again. So that's kind of how it works. So usually it's like either probably weekly phone calls or at least bi-weekly phone calls, or sorry, like probably at least twice a month phone calls, and like texting, following results, making sure you're in constant communication. I think just so they know that you're invested in their tennis, and so you kind of know what's going on in their lives, because they really kind of do become a part of your team at some point. So making sure you're up to date with what's going on.
I should note that if you look at the results, Kelsey's been super successful. Last season was one of the best seasons in the history of our tennis program, and so she's had a really remarkable momentum going here. So it appears you're doing a really great job with the recruiting. I wonder about there's the physical play that you see on the court, like how successful is someone? How much does what you learn in the phone call matter to you? In other words, do you ever get your opinion changed just based on the conversations and the communication about whether or not you want to pursue someone?
I think at Wisconsin, just because of the high level of academics, it's really important for us that they can excel in 2 areas. So the academic component and the tennis component are probably the two most important for us. I think clearly we want to develop leaders and we want to develop people that can have a balanced collegiate experience. But those two pieces, you can't really escape being successful in them. It's imperative that we find students that are high achieving, that want to be great in the classroom and on the court. And so I think those kind of initial phone calls and kind of taking peeks at their transcripts really help us figure out, like, to narrow our list to make sure that we're identifying PSAs that are going to be successful here at Wisconsin and within our program. So I think those two pieces really for us are kind of non-negotiables.
And that sounds like that'd be valuable insight for across, regardless of sport, for our developing coaches. When it comes to recruiting, Kelcy, what do you think those who are kind of in the pipeline right now, looking to become coaches, either as assistants or eventually becoming head coaches, what do you think they should be thinking about? What should they know that they might not know about recruiting specifically?
What are you going to sell? What's going to be really important to you? What things are you going to sell with consistency? And what things can you actually deliver on? Because I think at some point, if you can't deliver on what you sell, people aren't going to trust you to send student athletes to. And I think you have to know what you're about, and you can't be afraid to talk about those things and talk about them early in conversation. So for us, like, we're really about the academics and we're really about the tennis, and other places might be about other things. You might be able to be more social or to have a few more extracurricular activities, like at Wisconsin, because of the rigors of the school. When you get here academically, it's very robust. It's very challenging. The coursework is challenging. We know that we have to find strong students. And we also know the tennis is challenging. A lot of people on our team have aspirations of playing professional tennis. We just had somebody turn pro full-time. She's top 500. So I think for us, those two pieces are really, like, those are the people we're looking for. And we don't deviate from that. So I think that's a big thing in the recruiting piece. And also, what do you have that's maybe unique? You don't have to have the same things that everyone else has, but you have to know what you're about so that you can actually find the people that should be with you and maybe find the people that should not be with you.
When you said, just to clarify, when you say what is unique, do you mean what is unique about our university? I mean, or your program specifically, or do you mean what is unique about the student athlete?
I think it's all across all three, Pete. I think knowing what's unique about you. So for us, I think that's development. I think at Wisconsin, I think it's the unique blend of elite academics, of a forward-thinking institution, athletic department, and it's obviously a really robust offering across all areas. And then I think from the student athlete, what's unique? Why are they going to be drawn to us? Like, what thing do they have that's special or different that's going to make them a great fit for us too? So I think just kind of looking at all three of those areas and making, I keep talking about that. I keep referring to it as a puzzle, that analogy. So I think for us, it's always a puzzle. Like, how do the pieces fit best?
Does anyone else have questions for Kelcy, whether it's about recruiting or about the kind of the research on women in coaching, or really other topics? Oh, Maria.
Hi, Coach. Thanks so much for being here tonight. So Wisconsin athletics does not have a lot of female head coaches. It's mostly males. Are there things that you have done over the course of your tenure here to work with those other female head coaches, or like support systems? I'm also kind of curious because thinking about like finding a model, as you were mentioning earlier, but what here with there so few female head coaches, how have you used either other female coaches, or how do you all support each other, and anything across the gamut when it comes to coaching?
That's such a good question. I think there's a couple of ways to kind of develop a model. I think one is trying to hire more females. I think our senior administration, if you look at the most recent hires, if you look at rowing, they hired Coach Opitz. Like, I think that we are hiring more women. So I think that's kind of like the first piece. We're hiring the most qualified candidates. I think finding candidates is something that's really important. So for me personally, that's how do I try and attract, retain, and hire female coaches, or trying to enhance the pool so that we have more female coaches in the pipeline interested in coaching. And then I think here at Wisconsin, there's a really great community of people. I think we have really great male role models and female role models. So I think as coaches, we often get kind of siloed in our own worlds. And so I think kind of just trying to create those opportunities or those moments of community are really, really important. And so I think doing lunches or just even, impromptu conversations just kind of helps keep everybody going when things get hard. So I think those pieces are things that we're doing here. And then I also think just facilitating a younger generation of coaches, like our athletic department has the Women of Wisconsin affinity group. So I think they're trying to target student athletes at a younger age to kind of help them be interested in coaching and interested in other things that really affect women. So I think that those would kind of be the areas that Wisconsin's doing a great job in.
Does anyone else have any questions? Landry?
Hi, Coach. I've heard a lot about you. I'm pretty close with Ava Markham, and so I heard a lot about it. Attended a lot of your matches last year to support her. But my question is, tennis being such an individual sport, how do you collaborate with someone like Ava, who was like a veteran on the team last year, to make the new incoming players make it feel more like a team experience? And like, how do you work with her to help bring in your incoming recruits into the family of tennis family?
I think we did some cool things last year, actually, that were maybe different. We took the team to do like a high ropes course with the ROTC, which was different. So just to see them interact and how to solve problems up at Fort McCoy. So that was really cool. And then I think obviously having the opportunity we do a lot of team stuff in terms of like dinners and question and answer sessions. So that's something that we do. I think the team probably thought I was crazy because we did probably dinners for 2 weeks straight and they maybe did not want to look at each other, but we learned different things about each other, people's favorite colors, favorite movies, siblings. So I think when you know more about each person on the team, it helps you compete for something bigger than yourself, because obviously there's Ava, the person that's playing next to me, but there's Ava who's a triplet, Ava who has siblings at the matches, Ava who loves cats. So I think when you know those small things about each other, it really creates trust and it really helps cultivate camaraderie across a team that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have if you didn't know those pieces. And I also just think from a leadership perspective, we really believe that everyone on our team can be a leader. I think that helps really maybe lessen the load on one particular person to really have to have ownership over all things. So we really expect each person on the team to lead in areas they excel. So like Ava's a great example of somebody that loved to lead in the physical elements. So like leading by working, but we have other people that are really great at making the team be social. So they might be leading in that area. So I think it's really important to acknowledge where people can be leaders and then actually have the expectation that they're going to lead in that area. Hopefully that answers your question, Landry.
Yeah. All right. No, I do remember hearing about those team dinners now that you mention it. So.
Kelcy, I thought it was really neat to look at your roster and see that you have players from numerous different countries on your team. Does that shape at all the way you do team building in any different ways?
I think taking into account the cultural differences and backgrounds of everyone, I think we all try and start at ground zero. So I think just recognizing that not everyone's going to have the same beliefs and values and even experiences with tennis, just because it is such a global sport. A lot of people have traveled internationally. A lot of people have been independent from a really young age. So I think just coming to the table with those things in mind really help us kind of start fresh and start at zero, and try and eliminate judgment. So I think that's a really important piece for us. And obviously different countries have different political systems. So there's just so many facets to all of this. But I actually think having a team that is global really helps us have an appreciation for where we are at and the opportunity that we've been given. So I think that's what makes our team really special in that respect.
I always think that's even just such a fun, we love to watch tennis in our house. And it's just such a fun part about the game in general, the international nature of it, that you learn so much about people from all over the world. And it's truly an international game. And I can't think of too many other sports where it's that international. It's really a neat part of the game.
For sure. I think it's interesting because you definitely end up having like heroes and villains across the pro sport. So it's interesting because those could change depending on the country you're in too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, just thank you so very much. Very, very kind of you. It made me feel guilty when I hear about your schedule. So you're very kind to do that. And just we learned a ton from you, and we're just so lucky to have you as a coach here and a role model for all of us who are interested in coaching. Thank you very much,
So
Kelcy.
much for having me. I'm really excited to hear about what you all are learning and hopefully see you guys take our next generation of student athletes to the next level in whatever endeavors you're going to pursue. But I'm really excited to have you all as trailblazers. So thank you
Oh,
so much.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And safe travels to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a great week,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.